Have you ever thought curve brushes in ZBrush are the perfect thing for this job? And 10 minutes later, you're wrestling with settings, the curve is all twisted, the caps are broken, and you got no idea how you got there. Don't worry, you're not alone. I've been there as well. So this is why I made this video, and I'm gonna walk you through the essential settings, the modifiers, and the tricks that made the ZBrush curve brushes actually work for you. Hey, if you're new around here, my name is Pablo. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists level up their skills in the world of 3D, all in a way that is clear, fun, and actually doable. So in this video, we're gonna dive deep into the settings of the curve brushes in ZBrush, and I'm gonna show you some really cool tips and tricks that will make the curve brushes actually work for you rather than just guessing the settings and guessing what to do. All right, let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here we are in ZBrush. I'm using the 2024 version and also the standard UI so that you can follow along. And this is a demo character that I've been working on. Everything that you see in yellow right now, those are things that I've created using the curve brushes and a variety of techniques that I'm gonna show you, again, with different tips and tricks that I think are very valuable. So I have a cleaner version of this character. Let's just jump into this one. And just to show you how it is made, I have subdivision levels in the vest, the eyes, and the body. If I go down, let's actually reduce that. If I go down to the geometry palette, I have subdivision levels. This is not important or relevant. The only relevance of why I'm showing you this is because there is a trick that I'm going to give you that allows you to play with curve brushes or add curve brushes, even if you have subdivision levels. That's it. The rest, it doesn't really matter. You can have Dynamesh, you can have anything that you want, and the techniques that I'm going to show you will work just fine. So let's define what the curve brushes are, just because it is important to know what we're talking about. So if I click on the brush thumbnail here, anything that has the name curve on it will be a curve brush. So you have curve alphas, curve bridge, the curve flat, the curve flat snap, all of these ones. The most popular one, and probably the one that you've used before or have seen artists use before, is the curve tube. So I'm gonna start with that one. And this one is pretty cool because it allows you to create a geometry like tubes on the fly. So I'm gonna reduce my brush size and I'm gonna select my body. And I want to create something like the head or like the hair of this character, right? So we're going to focus on this area right here. So I want to go ahead and click and drag, and there we go. We have a curve, and if I let go, ZBrush is going to tell me, hey, you cannot do any of these because this has subdivision, so you have to freeze the subdivision levels and try again, or you have to delete them. But I don't want to delete my subdivision levels. So here comes the first tip. So instead of, deleting or freezing the subdivisions, you can do two things. You can duplicate your object and delete lower or delete higher. That will give you the exact same volume, but without subdivisions. However, the simplest thing you can do is go to a pen and choose something, anything in here would work, something like the sphere 3D. Make sure that you select that sphere. I'm gonna go into solo mode just to double check. There we go. So we have the sphere selected, and we can scroll all the way down to where it says initialize and click on Q cube. So this is going to create a Q cube, a very simple, quick cube. That is a dummy geometry. I'm going to bring in the gizmo by pressing the letter W on my keyboard. I'm going to, scale this down quite a bit. I'm also going to enable transparency so that I can see what I'm doing and push that inside. So the technique is really creating any geometry that you want, convert it into a Q cube, and make that cube fit within the geometry that you want to create. Let's say, in this case, the hair from, right? That's it. Let's turn this transparency off and get rid of the gizmo. So now with this cube selected that has no subdivision levels or anything like that, we can use the curve tube. So now with the curve tube selected, we can just go ahead and click and drag to draw our curve. Great, so we now have something going. Now the first problem that you'll see if you're not aware of this is that when you rotate around, the curve that you created, that tube, is not following the contours, in this case, of the head. It's just kind of like sitting on a single plane, right? Let me just make this a little bit more obvious. I'm gonna reduce my brush size and do it again, right? So you would expect that the curve will follow the curvature of the head, right? But right now, it is just kind of like from this point, creating, this tube in a single flat plane. So that brings me to the most important setting for this type of brushes, which is the picker palette. So let's undo that. I'm going to open up the left tray here, and I'm going to remove these brush settings. Let's get rid of that. And I'm going to go to the picker. Here we go, and drag and drop it into the left. So these are the most important settings to understand, the 1C and the continue C. So 1C, which is currently the default one selected for the tubes, is that when you click and drag, ZBrush is going to look at the first point that you clicked on once. That's why it's called the 1C. And that is going to be the depth point for this curve. So only one point. So if I rotate around, you see this is in a straight plane from that point. If I click somewhere here on the nostril and do something like this point is my new depth for this curve. So I can rotate around and you see it is based on that plane right there. So this is very handy in a few situations. We're going to come back to this. But it is very important to understand the difference. That's why I'm spending a little bit of time on here. So I'm going to click on Continue C, right? And the difference now is if I draw this, ZBrush is not only using one point to create this, is continuously evaluating the surface. That's why it's called continuous, right? So when I rotate around, you see it is nicely attached to the contours of the face. So those are the main two things that I wanted to show you. The difference between 1C that picks up once the depth of the curve and Continue C that constantly, evaluates the surface, and you can do these type of things like so, and you'll know for sure that this curve is being attached to the surface. So let's undo that. I'm gonna start fresh here. And I'm gonna press the X on my keyboard so that I have symmetry. And I'm gonna reduce my brush just a bit. All right, and let's go ahead and do something like this. Again, I have enabled the Continue C, and I'm just going to add a few points. Every time that I draw one curve, the previous one gets removed. Now, when I get to the center, just to make things a bit more interesting, I'm going to remove the X on my keyboard, or like the symmetry, and create a single one here. All right. And the great thing about the tip that I gave you before, that I'm drawing things on a cube, is that all of these things that I'm adding, or these tubes, are being attached to the cube, not to the head itself. All right. So let's click somewhere else. Actually, let me give you one extra tip that is not necessarily a tip. It's more to do with the settings. But sometimes if you don't know, you don't know, right? So you'll see that I have the curve. If I click somewhere outside the curve, it cancels that or just removes the curve itself. But there is actually a button to do that in case you need it. And that is under the stroke palette. So I'm going to drag and drop the stroke palette to the left because we're going to use it in a bit. And if you go to the curve functions, you can click on delete, and that will delete that curve. All right. So I'm going to clear the mask because remember, every time that you use a curve brush, it will mask out the rest. And I'm going to go into solo mode, and I'm going to hide and remove this. So I just hit the cube, and with it hidden, I'm going to go to the geometry, modify topology, and I'm going to delete hidden. So now we don't have that cube anymore, but now this is a separate tool that we can adjust. So you can do things at this point that are very easy. You can, for example, go to the deformation palette. Let's go to that one right here, and you can go to inflate and adjust this. And then you can also bring something like the move topological. And that move topological respects the continuity of topology. So I can, use the smooth brush to do something like this and kind of like bring this closer to the head and that sort of thing. So that is something very, very easy once you have, once you use this workflow and have multiple, subtools and in this case, tubes that represent kind of like the hair of this character. All right, so that is the first thing, and that's why I considered this to be a really cool tip to understand the difference between the 1C and Continue C. Now, I'm going to give you one more tip because I think it's really, really cool. So let's hide this, or actually, let me just duplicate this, and I want to make this into a Q cube. And that's the great thing about the Q cube. It can be, it could be from any geometry. So let's select that, and let's scale it down. Again, we just need it to be big enough, small enough that it will fit somewhere inside the head. Cool. All right, let me just hide the previous one just because I want to show you something else. This doesn't have anything to do with the Continue C or the 1C, but it is a very powerful tool. So instead of using the curve tubes like this one, I'm going to use something like the curve multi-tube. So this is very similar, but again, by default, it's set to 1C. So by understanding this, you know that you can just change this to Continue C, change my brush size, something very small, and do the same thing. But this time, every time that I draw a curve, ZBrush is actually maintaining the original curve. Let's do a couple more here, and that's it. So you'll see, maybe one more here. So you'll see that now we have multiple curves, and we still have the same idea of the curves, right? Or the tubes. But the cool thing about this is that if you don't like the shape of this tube, you can change it for absolutely anything you want, and you have multiple curves. So let's go ahead and switch now to the curve tubes. And I'm just going to click once, and that would update all my geometry at once. Not only that, but if I want something thicker, I can just go ahead and increase my brush size just slightly and click again on the curve, and that will update anything on the fly. So that is the advantage of using multiple curves, like for instance, using the multi or the curve multi-tube, and then just using anything else to update it. So maybe this is a little bit too much. I'm going to reduce it slightly and click on it. Now, if you see my original design, it has like a nice sort of tapering effect from the center, or like where it starts and when it ends. This is something that you can do with sculpting tools, or you can actually use the technique that I'm going to show you. So if we go back here, I haven't actually deleted or canceled my curves. I can actually go to the curve modifiers, and I can enable size. And by enabling size, I actually use this curve follow. So I'm gonna click on that to open it up. And you see we start with something really thin and go to something really thick. So if I click again, it will update automatically, right? So obviously this is not what we want, but we can tweak that based on the curve. So we can just increase that, and that way it sort of tapers out faster. Let's click on that. And now we have this effect. This is more likely, what we're gonna go for, but maybe this is a little bit too pointy. So let's take this point and push it up a little bit and update it. So now we don't have something as tapered. And the same way, if you want to end in a much more of a taper effect here, we can take the point here at the bottom or at the end, of this curve, and maybe create another one here. So it creates more of a bell shape, and we can update it. And you see we have a little bit of taper here, and most of the taper is happening in here. So that is pretty much for the first tip. And hopefully understanding the 1C and the continuous C is going to open up a lot of possibilities. And not only that, the fact that you can switch between different curve brushes once you have the curves, that is a really, really handy tip so that you can create this type of stuff. All right, so I'm gonna click somewhere else like so. And again, because this is a separate tool, I can bring in my brush topological, move brush topological, and I can adjust these, maybe, reduce the gap between these. But you can use absolutely anything you want. So maybe like the inflate, maybe also the smooth brush as well. So this becomes more about the sculpting and adjusting the volumes. But the placement and the creation of this is what I wanted to show you. Now, going back to the 1C setting, that's how I created the rest of these dreadlocks here at the back of the character. So let me show you the next technique. So I'm gonna go here. Let's use this one just because we have it already here. So I'm gonna press the B on my keyboard to bring in the palette for the brushes. And I'm gonna use the curve tubes. And this time I'm gonna use the 1C, which is the default behavior. And in terms of the size of the curves, let's see what we get. I'm gonna click and drag. So this is okay, but it's a bit too much in terms of the taper. So let's go ahead and remove the size altogether. And that way we don't have any influence of this curve. So we're kind of like back to square one. I'm gonna reduce my brush size a tiny bit more. There we go. And now what I'll do is I'm gonna turn off my symmetry so that I create something a bit more interesting. And I can just click and drag to create that first sort of dreadlock, and then click somewhere else to accept it. Now, because I'm using the 1C, this is using that sort of plane. So the whole tip is just that you can click and drag, and as you accept, you can rotate the camera really, or like the canvas, and that allows you to create all of these things very, very easily, and they're not intersecting because there is a slight change in the angle of the camera. So all of these, they kind of like sit in their own plane. So this is a very quick way to get this going. And I know this doesn't look great right now, and it looks like intersecting geometry, but this is like the first step, right? Once we have the geometry, we can go ahead and adjust it. That's it. All right. So we have something to get us going. Maybe we need another one here from a different angle. All right, something like that. So once we have this, we can go back to the move topological. Again, the move topological respects the continuity of these tubes, and all of them are separate objects. So I'm gonna use this to push this in. Maybe let's leave the polygroup so that you can see it. So all I'm doing now is adjusting this to push it closer to that, let's say the man bun here at the back that is holding all of these things together. And another thing is that you can totally isolate things. So for example, if these two are, they're intersecting a little bit too much, and the move tool is kind of like destroying things, you can hold the Control and Shift, isolate one, then hold Control and click on the outside on the canvas to mask it out, Control Shift and click to bring everything, Control and click to invert that. I know that sounds like a mouthful of steps, but once you get used to it, it's really simple. And then you can bring in the gizmo and then basically use that to rotate and reposition this. So this is the same technique that I followed to create all of these dreadlocks. And of course, this one has subdivision, and I adjusted the thickness of all of those. But the process is exactly the same. All right, so I got ahead of myself and I show you already how to update curves. But let me show you how you can update the actual curve before you change to a different brush. So this is very cool. Let me show you with maybe the vest. And what I'll do is I'm gonna duplicate the vest, and I'm gonna hide the first one. And the second, the duplicate, that's gonna be my dummy file, but I'm gonna go to the lowest subdivision and delete higher. So now, by going to solo mode, this is pretty much what I have for that vest. And what I'm gonna do here is create these, I don't know how to call it, it's some kind of like a scarf version that goes on top of the vest. So all of these tubes right here, it's kind of like a long scarf going on top. This is very stylized. I'm not sure exactly what this could be, but that's the idea. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this as a starting point. So let's enable symmetry, and I'm gonna use the curve tubes again with a decent size. And I'm gonna start here at the back. So click and drag, and let's move around here. And this is the first thing that you'll notice, right? Because we're using the 1C, again, this becomes one of the most important settings. So I'm gonna undo that. Let's enable continue C because it's very important. Let's click and drag, and there we go. So the next thing that I wanna show you is that as you rotate around, if you wanna continue this curve, all you need to do is hover over closer to this endpoint, and you'll see a little red line. It's kind of like hard to see, but you can actually edit this. So let's go here to the stroke palette, and you'll see this curve snap distance. So I'm gonna increase that to 100. And now you see that if I get closer, it will snap to my cursor a little bit faster, right? If I reduce it all together, and now I'm just going to have to go really, really close, and there's nothing actually happening. So that's what the curve distance does, or the curve snap distance. So let's set it all the way to 100, and I'm gonna get closer, and boom, it snaps to my cursor. And now I can click and drag, and you see that curve continues. So this is the trick really on how you can make something that maybe goes around or wraps around. You don't have to do it all in one motion. So that is essentially it. Now you'll notice as well that as I do that, I'm gonna go into Polygroup, the curve itself is actually twisting. So if you don't want that to happen, you can actually smooth that out, or you can rotate things around. So this is where things can become a little bit tricky when it comes to ZBrush. So if I hover over my curve here, you'll notice that my cursor changes from the red one to this sort of bluish or greenish tone. So if I have that one, I can press the spacebar and I can actually increase the edit radius. So this is the edit radius of my brush. And I can also edit that from this slider here. So this curve edit radius, that's what this is for. So if I press the spacebar and change the draw size, you see that this value right here is changing. So I'm going to increase that to something very, very large, like so. And as soon as I click this one, you'll see that it gets a different polygroup. That is because I'm actually editing. Every time that I click it, it's going to edit. Now, this is where things, like I said, gets a little bit tricky, but it's really, really powerful. So if you click once, and I'm holding the click, I haven't let go of my click, and then you press the control key, you can actually start rotating things around. So that's how you can adjust the rotation of the curve. So let me do that again, just so that it's clear. You need to be in the edit mode. So edit mode just means the cursor is green. So you're hovering over. If you press and do it with the red one, it's not going to do anything. So again, around here, click. Without letting go of the click, I'm going to press the control key, and I'm going to rotate things around. So I can do that based on the radius of the brush. So you see a lot of the curve is being updated. But if I want maybe just rotate this area right here, all I need to do is reduce my radius. I prefer to do it directly over the interface. So you can press the spacebar and reduce that. And I'm going to click and hold control. And you see now the rotation is not happening, all over the curve. Is actually just happening in a few areas. And that is determined by the size of the brush. So hopefully that makes sense. If not, don't worry. I'm going to do it a couple more times so that you can see it. But the main thing that I want to show you is that you're not restricted to just draw your curve in one single go. You can use the snap distance and all of that to continue your curve. So let's click to accept, and let's go into another one. So click and drag and continue. And there we go. Now, the next thing I want to show you, that I should have done it with the first one as well. But if you think about this as a drapery or some kind of clothing, when it's too attached to the vest, it doesn't look realistic, right? Because right now at the bottom, there is nothing preventing this or kind of like blocking the gravity of this piece, right? So in theory, this should be a bit straight here. So in the same way that I use the control key, let's actually increase this a little bit. The same way, if you click just to edit that curve, and instead of using the control to rotate, you can press the shift key, and that allows you to smooth that curve, right? So all I'm doing right now is smoothing that curve in the same way that you can smooth, any geometry. So now it is intersecting a little bit here, so that doesn't matter. We just push it slightly, like so, and then we can just start adjusting the placement. All right, so just a couple of things that are very, very powerful. One is hovering over, holding the control key to rotate. The other one is hovering over, clicking, and then shift to smooth out the curve. Let's do that one more time. I think I have like 4 or 5. Maybe these ones are a little bit too thick, but that's okay. It just shows the process really. So click, holding the shift key to smooth that out. And you see now it falls a little bit more natural. Maybe here it will be very evident. Click and drag and do that. All right, perfect. So those are the extra things that I wanted to show you with this technique. So now I'm gonna control, click, and drag just to remove that, that mask. And again, like I did before, I'm not gonna spend too much time on this, but in terms of the workflow, I wanna show you the steps. Once I have this, I can use the move topological in the same way to adjust the placement of this. I can use the smooth brush. Oh, by the way, let me isolate this because it is part of the same object. So Control Shift, click, click and click, and then delete hidden. So let's go to geometry, modify topology, delete hidden. Okay. All right. So now that we have this separate, let's bring in the vest again, and we can just use this as a reference to adjust this. So again, this part of the process is more about sculpting and adjusting volumes, but I guess the main tool or the main tip that I want to give you is in the creation of those volumes and what it takes to do them, because it's really, really easy. All right, so now that we covered a couple of tips, let's go ahead and combine them all together so that we can update the curves, we can set them up in a different way, and we can adjust the placement in, it's just a slightly different method, but it is a combination of what I already showed you. So I'm going to take the character itself, and I'm going to duplicate the entire body. And I'm also going to go to the geometry, and I'm going to delete lower. So now we have the subdivision already applied. So, and I have no subdivision level. And this is just so that I can show you the next technique in a simple way. So for the next technique, I'm going to try to recreate these straps. Again, this works for absolutely anything that you want to do that wraps around a character. And I'm sure you've seen a lot of different techniques online and how to do this in different ways. The one that I'm going to show you is slightly different. Just because it takes advantage of the tools that I've already shown you in this video, which are the update of the brushes, the update of the curves and the multiple curves. So let's go ahead and just do that. So I'm in solo mode now. So if I want to have multiple straps around it, the traditional or the obvious approach would be to select something, let's say like the curve brush, right? Something like this. Obviously enable continuity to make sure that it follows the contour. And we can just go ahead and draw something like this. And we already seen how the snap red line works. So we can continue to go around like so. And this is going to be very useful if you want to have a lot of control. So this is not a bad technique. Let's actually go like that. And let's go ahead and actually connect this together. And if you basically go back to the origin point, ZBrush is going to connect it. So now we have a tube. And of course, we can click and hold the Shift key to smooth that area as well. Maybe this is a little bit too much. But yeah, you can just click and Shift to smooth that. But again, this becomes a little bit tedious if you have to do multiple ones. So instead of doing that, let me undo all of that. Let's go ahead and mix some of the techniques and let me show you a really cool tip. So instead of using the curve brush, I'm not going to use the curve multi-tube either. I'm actually going to use the series measure guides. So I'm going to click on this one. So the series measure is something that you might actually be familiar with to drive the retopology using series measure. However, at the end of the day, all this is just a tool or a brush that allows you to create curves that then we can utilize. So we can click and drag, and this just create a curve. It doesn't have anything attached to it. It just literally is, that's what it is. It's a guide. But what we can do with this, let me undo that, is we can click and drag. And if you go outside of the model and touch the canvas, and then press the Shift key, that allows you to create a loop around a tubular shape. How cool is that? Again, let me repeat that because I know, if this is the first time that you use it, it's a bit confusing. All you need to do is click and drag to start drawing your curve. And then you continue to draw outside of the volume or the silhouette that you can see. So you see that the end point of what I'm doing is outside in the canvas. And once you have that, just press the Shift key. And sometimes it doesn't work. So let's just go ahead and do it again. So you just press the Shift key. You need to move around. And it's based on the normal of the polygon. So maybe this is not the best one to do it. Let's do it from this angle. So click and drag and hold Shift. There we go. All right. So the previous one didn't work because this part of the biceps is kind of like pointing downwards. So it's going to try to wrap it around, the normal of the polygons. But there we go. That's another one. Let's go ahead and click and drag outside of the silhouette, hold the Shift key. And that's another one. Click and drag, another one, and you can just rotate around. Let me just undo that. I want to do it again. Click and drag, hold the Shift key, and then you can move that around so that it basically changes the direction a little bit. I want to try to find a much more interesting one. Okay, I think this is good. Let's do one more here. Okay, so let's say that I'm happy with the placement of this. And by the way, you can also do it manually. So you can click and drag and do the snap thing to just continue drawing the curve. And so if you're happy with the curves, what you can do is switch to, let's go for the curve multi-tube. Again, doesn't matter which one it is. I just want to have some geometry. Let's click once. All right, there we go. Now, this obviously is not a strap. If you want, you can try the curve snap or the curve flat. The curve flat snap or the curve flat. I personally like this one because again, I have more control. And that is basically what I want to go for. So I want to go ahead and maybe increase the size a little bit. There we go, something like this, and click outside. Don't worry, I know that this looks awful, but this is kind of like the first step. So by default, when you use a curve brush, everything else, once you accept the curves, is going to be masked out. So that allows you to go to the subtool palette and go to the split section here and click on split on mask points. So if you click on that one, it's going to take your original mesh, the one that we deleted the subdivision, and it's going to give you these extra ones. So now with this one selected, I'm going to go into this polyframe and I'm going to edit this slightly. So this is going to be very, very simple, but I think it works and I think it's a handy thing to do. I'm going to use the C remesher. So let's go ahead and filter by the BZM. So C modeler, sorry, not C remesher, the C modeler. And I'm going to hover over any of these edges, right click, and I'm going to select the delete option and I'm going to select delete edge loop complete. So this is telling ZBrush that I want to delete edge loops based on whenever I click. So I'm going to click on this one to delete that and this one, and I'll do the same thing with this and with maybe from here with this one. So I'm just deleting the entire loops of these tubes so that it creates more of a strap effect. All right. And still, this is pretty thick, so I can just go ahead and smooth this out. So I'm going to go to the deformation palette and go to the smooth slider and just smooth this slightly like so. All right. So again, if you're not happy with how this looks, you can continue to edit it, but the placement is originally what I'm looking for to get, right? So there's a few things that you can, improve this. So I'm going to show you a couple. So let's hold Control and Shift to access the selection tools. And I'm going to switch to the select lasso. So this next tip is not necessarily about the curves itself. It's just a general tool. But now that we have this, I'm going to show you how you can do it. So Control, Shift, and click. And because I have the select lasso, it automatically selects the entire edge loop. So I'm just basically isolating these faces. And now I can hold the Control and Shift to invert it and delete that hidden part. So again, we've used this along the way a few times. So delete hidden. And now we have these single straps that are single-sided that are really close to our mesh. And if they're not close enough to what you want, which in this case doesn't look really good, we can go ahead and project this geometry. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to use the move brush just to adjust a couple of things that need a bit more adjustment. And let's go ahead and open up the project tab here. And I'm going to click on project all just with the default settings. And you'll see ZBrush tries to project the geometry to the underlying geometry. But some points are not as obvious for ZBrush to project. So what we can do is increase the distance just a tiny bit, project all. And now you see we're starting to get something better. Let's increase it a bit more. And this might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to do it manually just because it's a little bit too far. I'm just going to bring these points closer and let's do the same project. This one is still a little bit too far. All right. And believe me, I know that there are other techniques that work for this. I just wanted to show you this because to me, this works really, really well. And you just need to go through that process of projecting. Now, this thing right here, that it is not projecting exactly where the, let's say the arm geometry is, that is because we don't have enough geometry, we don't have enough points. So again, another simple thing you can do is bring in the C modeler and we can right click on the edge, go to insert, and we can click on insert multiple edge loops, click and drag, and then we can produce just a couple more all around so that when you project those details or these straps, it's going to be a little bit better. So project all, and now everything is following the contours of your mesh a bit better. And just to visualize things better, I'm going to go ahead and go to the Polygroup palette right at the bottom here. Go to Polygroups, Auto Groups, and now we have a polygroup for each one. Now, obviously, this is still intersecting. Don't worry, we're going to just go into that next tip in just a second. But now that I have this, I'm going to go to the Geometry palette here. I'm going to go to Dynamic Subdivision. I'm going to click on Dynamic, and I'm going to go to the thickness. So I'm just going to add a little bit of thickness. I'm also going to turn off this post-subdivide so that I get a nice soft area right here. And you'll see that it is working very, very nicely. And because we have the different polygroups, I can easily isolate them. And I'm going to use the Move Topological or the Move Brush. Let's actually move Topological. And I'm going to isolate the red one, for example. Let's go back to our select rectangular piece. Oh, and one thing that I just noticed, because I use the auto group, these have different polygroups. So another thing very quickly that we can do is do mirror and well. So modify topology, mirror and well. So we have the same polygroups at the same time. So we can isolate them at the same time. All right. So I'm going to isolate this one, mask, bring in the rest, invert the mask. And now I can just go ahead and slowly move this out of the way. right? Same thing with the previous one. Once you do this a few times, it becomes like I said, almost like second nature. I'm also using the smooth brush, by the way, to just smooth this out. All right, so that is pretty much it. Obviously, this is just to show you the technique. I would have spent a little bit more time doing this. Like I said, there are multiple tools and multiple techniques of achieving the same thing. This might not be the fastest one, but it definitely gives you a lot of control if you want to build the thing from scratch. All right, so this video is getting a little bit long, but I want to show you a couple more things. So the next one has to do with these sort of like spikes, or let's call it like stylized fur that I have here on the neck of the character. And also the tubes that you can see that, you know, they're not tubes, they're kind of like some kind of like thick fabric all around the vest. But those ones use additional settings in the stroke palette that sometimes get overlooked. So let's go ahead and start by the simplest one, which is the with the vest. So I'm going to select that and let's just go ahead and duplicate it. So just to make it easier. And again, I'm going to delete lower. So we have something pretty high res. And let's remove that one. And so the first one, which again is making use of some of the tools and techniques that I showed you before, is to frame the mesh. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift to isolate this polygroup. The rest is hidden. And we don't have to delete it, but just so that we reiterate the process that we've used before, I'm going to go to Modify Topology, click Delete Hidden. That's it. So we don't have anything else. And this is pretty simple. We can just go to the stroke palette. We can go to the curve functions and we can click on Frame Mesh. You see this frame mesh has multiple switches here. So we can make it frame the entire border of the polygroup. We can make it based on the polygroups, or we can frame based on the crease edges. So if I leave this by default and click frame mesh, now we have a curve that goes around all of these pieces. So at this point, we can just use, you know, the same technique that I've showed you before. Let's choose something else like I use in my demo. I think I use this one, the Insert Cylinder Extrusion. I think it's called like that. And I'm going to reduce the brush size and click once, and maybe something a bit smaller actually. All right, I think that is pretty much it. Maybe less than that. Trying to find the right balance. There we go. All right, so that is how easy this is. Let's click on accept. And now we have basically used the frame function to place all of those things. So now this single-sided mesh looks like it's thicker because it has those rounded things. Now, another thing that you can do, and this is just an extra, I didn't use it in my demo, but it's something that could be really, really handy. So if I enable polyframe, I can go ahead and maybe bring in a different masking tool. So pressing the Control key, I'm going to use the mask lasso, and let's do something like this, just for demo purposes. Yeah, let's switch back to the mask pen. Let's actually connect this like so. All right, and I'm going to hold the Control and W. That will assign a polygroup. And if I isolate this and go to the deformation palette, again, I'm not going step by step on this one because it's just an extra thing that you probably already used anyway. But I'm going to go to the polish by groups. This is going to polish the difference between these groups. All right, perfect. And now that I have this, if I click on frame mesh, it's going to give me, you know, curves everywhere around. But I don't want that. I only want the difference between the polygroups. So let's undo that. Make sure that only the polygroup one is enabled. Click on frame mesh, and you see that now we have the curve going around that polygroup. So we can just go ahead and repeat the process. Let's go ahead and add this one here. Let's try to find the same size. There we go. And let's accept that. So now we have a nice pattern. So now that you know this, you could actually achieve the same result of these sort of stripes that I created before by framing or, you know, creating different polygroups on the vest and using this technique. So that's what I wanted to show you, because is multiple ways of achieving the same thing. You just choose whatever suits your workflow, whatever you think is easier. But it's about understanding the basics and the settings so that you can, you know, make them work for you. So the final one that I think is really, really cool, and again, is something that is not used or covered very often, is the Reppel brush, or the Reppel setting of the curve brush. So to do that, let's actually select this again. I'm going to duplicate it just so that we can have it there as a reference. And I'm going to delete lower. And I'm also going to hide those things that I created for the scarf. So we have something cleaner to work with. All right, and let's go ahead and use the curve. Let's go ahead and use something like the curve multi-tube. And I'm going to click and drag, and that basically follows the contours because we have the continuity. Now, if I undo that, the natural thing based on whatever I show you already is to go for something like 1C and start doing this type of stuff and rotating the camera, you know, creating this type of like a stylized fur. But that's a little bit tedious. And I want to show you something else again. So I want to leave it as it is, continue C, to do this. So it is following the contours of the geometry, but I'm going to change a few things. So I'm going to open up all of these things, the curve functions, sorry, not the curve functions, the curve and the curve modifiers, these things right here. And basically, we're going to use this repel strength. So the repel strength essentially looks at the volumes that you have and the surface, and is going to literally repel that curve from the point that you started to the one you finish. So with no repel brush, this is basically what we get. If I increase the repel brush, the repel strength to 10, and I click again, you see, even though I'm doing the same motion, like moving downwards, ZBrush is repelling. So it's starting here, but the rest is repelling, right? So let's go ahead and increase that maybe to 40, click and drag, and now you see it is creating that effect. So you'll see that by changing these things, it becomes a very clear, easy way to achieve some of the things that might look really hard, but you have understanding of this. Now, the repel fall-off is essentially how fast you are repelling. So if I increase that to, let's say, 4 and update this, let's get closer so you can see the effect. It's not updating it. Oh, because we're using the multi-curve. Let's do it again. So click here. You see it's a lot more tapered, so it's like harder to see. So I'm going to reduce that to 1.1. Let's do it again. So now it is coming faster, right? So it's more going straight, and then it's going, it's like a more perfect curve in a way. Let's go ahead and push the repel to 50. Do it one more time. So I think this one would be good. All right. So the point here is that we can play with these values. I'm going to set this to 1 so that it's a nice integer number. And then once you have the one that you like, I'm going to undo all of this. This setting can stay there, and we can increase the brush size, maybe not that much. Click and drag, and I can do these things and create that effect, right? So this is pretty cool. So that is the trick in itself. So the rest is just more of the same. However, I want to show you something else, because my original design has this nice sort of like tapering. Well, when I say nice, it is a taper. I haven't finished, so it's not that nice. But we can go ahead and do the same thing that I showed you before. So we can click on the size, and instead of starting small and finish large, which is what is currently happening, if I leave it like so, I'm going to invert it. So let's click on this point, the point itself. Click on that, put it there, maybe at the top, and then one at the bottom. I'm going to leave it around there, and let's go ahead and update that. Now that shifts that effect. But this feels like this actually could be like an interesting thing to create some claws in some creatures, right? Or fangs or something. But it's a little bit too thin. So I just want to make this taper slowly so that it becomes more like a stylized clump of hair. There we go, something like that. All right. Now, the final tip that I'm going to give you for this technique before I start making more of this is that if I like this, but I want to start moving it around, let's say push this one slower like so, everything is moving and everything is, snapping, and I don't want to do that. So the next thing you can do is go here to where it says lock start. And if you lock the start, that basically allows you to move this anywhere that you want, but the start of the curve is going to be locked. So that's something else that you can do. Now you can also click on bend the start, and that allows you to move like the entire curve a little bit more freely. But yeah, that's kind of like getting into a different tip that is not conducive to anything good in this one. So I'm just going to leave it as it is. And let's go ahead. Maybe let's leave the lock start so we can move this around. And yeah, just like start doing these bits. But I think the most important thing for this tip really is that you don't have to move the camera around and try to get the perfect curvature. You just literally draw in I would say like a horizontal version of this. And then you create these bits. And I'm doing this very, very fast compared to, if I were to do something a bit better. Not to say that what I've done in my other demo is great, but I did spend a little bit more time. I just want to do a few things like this. All right, so I'm not going to do the whole thing. Just wanted to show you the technique. But the next thing is to edit this, right? So let's clear that mask. Let's actually isolate the bits that we don't need. And let's go ahead and delete them. So again, we've done this a few times already. So delete hidden. So now we have this bit. And let's bring in the rest of the stuff that we have. All right. So these are a little bit thin for my taste. You can decide if you want to make them thicker or thinner. In my case, I just want to go to the deformation palette, and I'm going to the inflate one, and I'm going to increase that just a bit. All right. And that's it. We can just go ahead and maybe subdivide this a couple times. So Control D, and let's use the move brush to, place this a bit better so that it feels like these things are part of the the vest, whatever this thing is. And of course, if there are some of them that are intersecting, you can shift to the move topological and then just push those like so. One last tip that I can give you that is actually pretty useful in this case. Right now, these clumps of hair, they look very soft towards the end. So if you use the move topological, which I think will be better in this case, and you go to the brush palette, let's go ahead and dock that to the left. You can go to the curves or to the curve subpalette, click on AccuCurve, and that will give you a very pointy effect. So you can click and drag and push those like so. And again, because I'm using the move topological, it respects the continuity of the topology. So it's not grabbing or pulling from all of them at the same time, only the ones that I'm using to, or clicking first. So just a very quick and simple way to generate this. And because I use the curve brush as well, the topology is very clean. So you don't need to retopologize or do anything. You can just continue working like that, and that's it. So yeah, hopefully all of these techniques and this very in-depth long tutorial has been of help. I just wanted to cover some of the essentials because like I said, once you understand how things work behind the scenes, you can take advantage and have a lot of control and be very confident about it. So ultimately, once you understand the settings, the curve brushes go from frustrating to incredibly powerful very quickly. And if you like this type of tips and want to continue build your skills, check out this video where I show you 5 essential tips and tricks in ZBrush that are probably not as well known. So I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.